was 11 p.m. when I started the drive toward Appalachia. I'd rented a small cabin through Airbnb in a remote area of West Virginia. I just wanted a week of peace away from the chaos of DC. The highway slowly turned into these narrow, winding back roads. The trees were so thick that my headlights just seemed to get swallowed by the pitch-black darkness. My GPS started losing its signal every few minutes. Suddenly, I saw someone standing on the shoulder of the road. They were wearing a faded yellow raincoat, even though it wasn't raining. They didn't look at me. They were just standing there with a hunched back like they were looking for something in the grass. I slowed down a bit, but my gut told me to keep driving. A mile later, the signal died completely. I found myself at a crossroads that wasn't on the paper map I had with me. Suddenly, I caught a single light in my rearview mirror. It was either a motorcycle or a car with a broken headlight. It was coming up behind me, incredibly fast. They didn't turn on their high beams. Instead, they were flashing the light in this weird rhythmic pattern, almost like a code. I tried to speed up, but the road was full of gravel and sharp turns. A few minutes later, I felt a hard thud at the back of my car. It wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate ram. I lost control for a second before I managed to steady the wheel. I looked in the mirror again, and the light was completely gone. Dead silence. I pulled over, my heart pounding against my ribs. I got out to check the damage, and what I found made me completely forget about the car. There was a cell phone lying on my trunk. The screen was lit up. There was an incoming call from my own number. Before I could even process it, I heard a low whisper right behind me. "You forgot your door was open." I ran back into the car and floored it. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In my back seat, there was a soaking wet yellow raincoat, even though no one had entered the car but me. I finally reached the cabin in a total state of panic. It was an old cedar place at the end of a long dirt driveway. I locked the doors immediately and checked every single window. I threw that yellow jacket out into the woods, shaking the whole time. I tried to call the cops, but there was zero service. I sat in the living room trying to catch my breath. The cabin was filled with old photos of a family I didn't recognize. I noticed something disturbing. In every single photo on the wall, the faces had been neatly scratched out with something sharp. Then, I started hearing a faint scratching sound coming from under the floorboards. I thought it was rats, but the sound was too rhythmic, like someone was trying to write something on the wood from underneath. I went to the kitchen to grab a knife for self-defense. On the fridge, I found a sticky note. It was written in my exact handwriting. "Do not look at the mirror in the hallway." A chill went through my body. I never wrote that note. I walked slowly toward the hallway. I tried so hard not to look, but my curiosity was stronger. I looked. I didn't see my reflection. I saw the room behind me in the mirror, but I wasn't in it. Instead, there was a tall man wearing a disgusting leather mask standing right where I was supposed to be. I spun around, but the room was empty. I looked back at the mirror, and the man was leaning closer to my invisible self. Suddenly, the lights in the cabin cut out. Total darkness. The silence was so heavy it felt like I wasn't even on Earth anymore. Then I felt something cold touch the back of my neck, and a voice whispered in my ear, "You look better when you're afraid." I ran for the front door, but it was chained shut from the outside with heavy chains that weren't there minutes ago. I ran upstairs, ducked into the only open room, and crawled under the bed. As I lay there, I heard heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. Step, step, step. They stopped right in front of the door. After a long silence, a dark, metallic-smelling red liquid started seeping under the door. And then the phone I had lost in the car started ringing right next to me under the bed. I pulled the phone from under the bed with trembling hands. The screen was showing a live video stream. I realized with horror that the camera was pointed at me right now, from the angle under the bed. I was watching myself hide. The person holding the camera was standing right next to the bed. I didn't dare move. I looked very slowly at the side of the bed. I didn't see anyone. But on the screen, there was a creature, dressed exactly like me, crouching next to me and holding a long knife. I realized I wasn't seeing reality with my eyes, but through the screen of this cursed phone, the live stream showed the creature raising the knife to stab me. I felt a sharp, sudden pain in my back, even though I didn't see anyone touch me. I screamed and collapsed. I started crawling toward the window, trying to smash the glass. When I looked out, I didn't see the forest. I saw the Airbnb parking lot in DC where I had started hours ago. The cabin was just an illusion, or some kind of glitch in space. I broke the window and jumped. I didn't hit grass. I fell into a pitch-black room that smelled like rot. I turned on my phone's flashlight and found myself in a basement filled with hundreds of cell phones, all ringing at the same time. Every phone was showing a live stream of a different person hiding in a similar cabin. In the corner, I saw a yellow raincoat hanging up, and next to it a pile of IDs. I found my own ID on top of the pile, but the date of death written on it was today's date, and the time was almost exactly the current time. I heard a voice from the top of the basement say, "The show's over. Thanks for participating." The basement door creaked open, and a person carrying a chainsaw walked down. They were wearing a mask made from my own face. I tried to scream, but I realized my mouth had been sewn shut with heavy-duty fishing line. The last thing I saw before the camera cut out was myself. I mean, that thing that looks like me. Getting into my car and driving back to my house, where my wife and kids are waiting. I'm still here in the basement, writing this on one of the phones, praying to God that you don't open the door when I get home tonight. It was my first night working as a graveyard shift security guard at a massive supermarket on the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona. The store was supposed to be closed for maintenance for a week. The supervisor told me my job was simple. Don't let anyone in, and most importantly, do not open the back freezers no matter what you hear. I thought it was just some lame joke the veteran employees played on the new guys. It was 1 a.m., and the lights were dimmed to about 50%. The supervisor who handed me the keys looked unnaturally pale. He wouldn't look me in the eye even once. He told me in a dry voice, "You're gonna hear noises coming from the back freezers. Do not open them. No matter what happens, do not open them." I figured he was just trying to scare me, since I was the new hire. I started my first round through the long aisles. The sound of my boots on the marble floor echoed in a way that made you feel like someone was following you just a few paces behind. I reached the cleaning supplies aisle. It was a very long stretch. I noticed a bright orange box of laundry detergent lying in the middle of the aisle. I leaned down, picked it up, and put it back in its proper spot on the shelf. I kept walking to the end of the aisle, then turned around to head back. I froze in my tracks. The box was lying in the exact same spot, but this time it was open, and the powder was scattered around it in a perfect geometric circle, like someone had drawn it with a ruler. My heart started racing. I looked around. The aisles were completely empty, and the cameras were moving slowly, but I felt like something was watching me from above. I went back to the security room to check the footage. I sat in front of the 16 monitors. I started looking for the footage of the cleaning aisle from 2 minutes ago. What I saw made it hard to breathe. On the screen, I saw myself enter the aisle, pick up the box, and put it on the shelf. But as soon as I turned my back, something emerged from under the shelves. It wasn't human. It was a very thin creature with disgustingly long limbs wearing the same employee uniform. This thing didn't walk. It slid across the floor, put the box back, and then looked directly at the camera. Its face didn't have eyes. Instead, there were two small screens flickering red where the eyes should be. Suddenly, the monitor I was looking at cut to black, and I heard a long beep coming from the store's speakers, followed by the sound of a tiny child's laughter coming from the very aisle I had just been in. By 2:30 a.m., I decided I wasn't staying a second longer. I headed toward the glass front doors. I pulled out my keys and tried the lock, but the key wouldn't turn. I looked through the glass to the outside, but I didn't see the street or the parking lot. I saw the cleaning supplies aisle again. It was physically impossible. I opened the door and ran out, thinking I'd hit the street, but I found myself walking into the store from the back entrance. I was trapped in a loop. The place wasn't a supermarket anymore. It was a maze feeding on my mind. The speakers started blaring at full volume. It wasn't music. It was recorded distress calls of customers screaming, "Get us out of here!" I headed toward the back freezer area the supervisor had warned me about. The banging there had become incredibly violent, so much so that the heavy metal doors were bulging outward with every hit. Suddenly, the banging stopped. Dead silence. Then I heard a whisper coming from behind freezer door number 404. It was a voice that sounded exactly like mine. It said, "Elias, you forgot to check the third cooler." I started running aimlessly. Every time I entered an aisle, it got longer and narrower. The shelves started closing in on each other. The products on the shelves began to change. They weren't canned food anymore. They were glass jars containing things that looked like human fetuses, and every jar had a label with the name of a former store employee. I found a jar with my name on it. It was empty, just waiting for something to be put inside. Suddenly, all the store lights cut out except for one light at the very end of a distant aisle. Under that light stood the supervisor who had hired me. He was standing with a hunched back, and when he turned toward me, his lower jaw dropped unnaturally low. A thick black liquid started leaking from his mouth as he pointed toward the maintenance room and said, "The owner wants to see you now." I ran toward the maintenance room, not because I was brave, but because I was trying to escape the creatures that started appearing behind the shelves. They were pale, faceless things, pushing shopping carts filled with torn human clothes. I burst into the maintenance room and slammed the door behind me. The room was filled with mirrors. I looked into a mirror, and I didn't see my reflection. I saw the room completely empty. But when I looked at my phone screen, which I was using as a flashlight, I saw myself on the screen standing right behind me, holding a long hunting knife. I realized with horror that the truth wasn't what my eyes were seeing, but what the cameras were capturing. This place operates on different visual frequencies. On the screen, the creature that looked like me was closing in on my neck. I felt the cold steel of the knife touch my skin in real life, even though I saw no one in the mirror. I screamed and fell to the floor. Suddenly, the ceiling of the room opened up and hundreds of cell phones started falling out. Every phone was displaying a live stream of a different person in a different location, all going through the same experience. I found a small hatch in the floor and jumped through. I thought I'd reach a basement, but I fell back into the cleaning supplies aisle again. This time the lighting was a deep, blood red. I looked at my hands and discovered with terror that my skin was changing. It was becoming plastic and shiny, like a display mannequin. My facial features were fading away, and my eyes were turning into small screens. I heard the supervisor laughing from somewhere above me, saying, "You are a piece of furniture now. You are part of store 404. I don't have a mouth to scream with anymore, nor eyes to cry with. I'm standing in aisle 4, disguised as a security guard." If you ever walk into a store and see a guard who doesn't move, do not go near him. I'm not trying to protect you. I'm trying to warn you before you become the next product on the shelf next to me. The store is opening its doors now, and you are the first customer. My name is Jordan. I work archiving old videotapes in the basement of a public library in Portland. Last Tuesday night, I found a rusty metal box with no markings on it. Inside was a single VHS tape. Written on it in shaky handwriting were the words, "Do not watch after midnight." I figured it was just some cheesy prank from the 80s. I popped the tape into the player and hit play. At first, it was just a broadcast of an old kids' show. A rabbit puppet sitting in a dark room. The rabbit didn't move, but the audio was a constant low whisper of names and numbers. Suddenly, the broadcast glitched. A blue screen appeared with the text, "Emergency system test. Do you know who's standing behind you right now?" I brushed it off as a tape error, but then I noticed something weird. The room the rabbit was sitting in looked way too familiar. I focused on the details, the carpet, the shelves, the paint color. I let out a yelp and fell out of my chair when I realized the room on the screen was my bedroom at home. Except it looked old and decayed. The rabbit on the screen slowly raised its hand and pointed toward the closet. At that exact moment, I heard the distinct click of a closet door locking back at my house, even though I was miles away in that basement. I rushed to eject the tape, but the machine wouldn't let go. The screen started flashing rapid images of people screaming silently, their faces distorted as if they'd melted from high heat. Then, a new message popped up. "Jordan, thank you for letting us in." A bone-chilling cold filled the air, and a heavy smell of sulfur began to overwhelm the room. I looked up at the security camera in the corner of the basement and saw myself on the small monitor. But right behind me, a long shadow was emerging from the wall. It had no body, just two long spindly hands reaching for my neck. I bolted out of the basement and dove into my car. I drove like a maniac toward my house, thinking I'd be safe there. When I walked in, everything was eerily quiet. I went straight to my bedroom and headed for the closet the rabbit had pointed to. I yanked it open, empty. I took a deep breath of relief, but when I looked in the mirror on the back of the closet door, my heart stopped. I didn't see my reflection. I saw the rabbit from the video sitting on my bed in the mirror, holding a real kitchen knife. I spun around toward the bed. Nothing was there. I looked back at the mirror, and the rabbit was now standing right behind me, placing its hand on my shoulder. I felt a real, heavy pressure on my shoulder in the room, but I couldn't see anyone. I ran toward the kitchen, and I started hearing heavy, wet footsteps following me. Every time I turned off a light in the house, the sound got closer. I realized this entity could only move in the dark spots, the places my eyes weren't directly looking at. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but the screen turned into the same broadcast from the basement. The rabbit appeared, whispering, "You're losing the game, Jordan. Light is just a delay of the inevitable." Suddenly, the power cut out for the entire neighborhood. The house was plunged into total darkness. I could hear heavy, foul-smelling breath right behind my ear. I tried to flick my lighter, and with every flash of light, I saw a different human face staring at me from the corners of the ceiling, faces of missing persons I'd seen on old news reports. They were all whispering one thing: "Join us." I started crawling through the dark toward the door, but I discovered that the walls of the house were turning into a sticky substance like melted videotape. My hand sank into the wall every time I touched it. I reached the basement in my house, and there I found a gruesome surprise. It wasn't a basement anymore. It was a massive library of shelves. On every shelf sat a person in total silence. Their eyes were sewn shut with metal wires and their ears were plugged with wax. They were all wearing tattered rabbit costumes. I saw an empty chair at the end of the aisle. Above it was a sign with my name on it. Jordan, archive number 909. The shadow entity appeared before me, and it wasn't a shadow anymore. It was a mass of tangled magnetic tape, shaped like a human body. It started wrapping the tapes around me, and I felt my memories being pulled out. I was watching my entire life play out before my eyes like an old movie being erased. I started forgetting my name, my mother's face, even how to speak. I'm not human anymore. I'm just data stored inside an old VHS tape. If you ever go to a public library and find an unmarked metal box, please, do not open it. Because if you watch that tape, I will come out of your screen, not to kill you, but to take your place in the world of the living, and leave you in my place on that cold shelf in the dark basement. The broadcast is starting now. Can you see my face behind the glass?